When I was a kid in elementary school, I had one best friend, we'll call him Jim. We were pretty much inseparable and spent a ton of time at each other's houses. I loved when he came to my house. We'd play in my giant sandbox, or with my train set downstairs, or build snow forts in the winter. It was a blast. I wasn't as thrilled to go to his house, however. His mom was an absolute angel, soft-spoken, incredibly kind, and she often took us fun places, water parks, toy store, museums, etc. They even had a pool. What made me apprehensive was his dad. He was a complete 180 from Jim's mom. Really tall, well over 6'6", perpetually grumpy, and had a booming bass voice that you could feel in the air when he spoke. He intimidated the living shit out of all the neighborhood kids that came over to Jim's house, including me. A good example of his ability to instill maximum fear simply by existing. I'd be over at Jim's house, walking down the hall to use their bathroom, and his dad would appear coming from the opposite direction. He loomed over me like a giant, so I usually did my best to cower and try to be invisible as he went by. On more than one occasion, just as I was about to pass him, he spun on me and got right in my face, yelling, "What are you doing?" I'd stammer out that I had intended to use the bathroom, but no longer needed to since I'd pissed my pants. He'd straighten back up and continue walking, laughing to himself as he went. In hindsight, I think he knew he scared the hell out of us and enjoyed it. That being the case, I quickly learned to recognize the sound of his truck when he came home. I'd run to Jim's room and wouldn't come out until it was time to go home. The other thing that was scary as hell, Jim's dad and mom got into loud arguments all the time. I have to give her credit. Jim's mom would get right back in his face and not back down an inch. Still, anytime we'd hear them shouting from the other room, we both worried that we'd get it from Jim's dad for some unknown reason. To the best of my knowledge, nothing ever became physical, but oh man, the racket they made when they'd go at each other. Once, during the summer when we were all playing around the pool, he approached me from behind, lifted me up, and tossed me into the deep end of the pool. I couldn't swim. I thrashed around wildly and was about to drown when Jim's mom dove in and pulled me out, giving her husband a nasty look. He just laughed to himself and wandered off. One winter day, Jim and I and his sister were out sledding in the backyard, and the zipper of my snowsuit came off the track. I went inside and told Jim's mom, who told me his dad would fix it. I tried to say no, it's okay, but she was already calling down the stairs to him. The booming response from the basement, "Send him down." I went down those stairs as if I was living my final moments, all shaky and scared. There were almost no lights in the basement, just a single bulb hanging from a string in the workroom where he was located. "Come here," he boomed. I nervously stepped over and he bent down on one knee to take a look at the zipper. Even then, he was still 3 feet taller than I was. He stood and walked over to his bench, returning with a pair of needle nose pliers. He put the wayward zipper back on its track, then bent so he was almost nose to nose with me. I was petrified. He took the pair of pliers, opened them up and placed them on my nose, then gave them a little bit of pressure. Just enough to where it almost hurt, but not quite. Then he removed them, stood, and chuckled like he always did. I must have done 140 miles per hour running up the stairs and back outside. As a little kid, I'd never been more terrified. Fast forward to age 15, 16. My folks and I had long since moved out of the area, and Jim and I hadn't spoken since about the 4th grade. My parents informed me that Jim's dad had been put on the predator list for having underage child content on his home computer. They asked me if anything funny had ever happened during my time at Jim's house as a kid. I immediately recalled the nose pliers situation, and a chill went up my spine like you wouldn't believe. Thankfully, I wasn't a victim, but my blood ran cold when they told me that. I lived in a bizarre little house as a child. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house except freestanding, with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. It was full of quirks, such as 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, a backyard so small that you could not take 5 paces without hitting the fence, and an old-timey rope-pulled dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, but unfortunately, it was incredibly old, and half of its charm was the fact that it seemed to have been designed by an inarticulate conclave of lunatics. and eventually the repair costs exceeded what my parents were willing to sink into it, and we had to move. Preparing for the move was a chore. I packed most of my stuff myself, and I had taken to throwing stuff down the dumbwaiter and shoving all my clothes so thickly in my closet that they became a single solid brick of fabric. While clearing that closet out, in fact, I came across a feature I hadn't noticed before: an attic entrance in the roof. Being an adventurous kid, I opened her up, stood on the clothes brick, and began my first and last exploration into the topmost part of our weird little house. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as it should have been. The place was strung with old red Christmas lights, which still burned with leftover incandescence, and a dozen little cracks and holes peeped down into all the bedrooms below. The second thing I noticed was that the place was set up for habitation. The insulation was plasticed away. There was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets, and a rusted mint green refrigerator which still worked when I tested it. The third thing was the bones. There were a lot of bones. I was a kid at the time, with a limited understanding of anatomy, but there were bones of all types heaped into a series of piles around the center of the attic. Small and large, clean and white, from every and any imaginable sort of creature, haphazardly stacked in a half-dozen osseous clumps. 2 of them were blackened, as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest those blackened piles were scrawled in dark bone-char messages. Mostly they were just smears, but the word sorry appeared more than once. That room had been sitting over my head for 8 years while I slept. Hey guys! Since it's spooky season, I wanted to share a scary experience I had during a trip to the Philippines. I was born and raised in the Philippines until I was 11, and then my family moved to Canada. Living in Canada, I kind of left all the ghost stories and paranormal stuff behind. It's not really something we take seriously here. But after being in Canada for 7 years, my mom decided to take my siblings and me back to the Philippines for a vacation. Even though I left when I was young, I stayed in touch with some childhood friends who still live there. Many of them have families now, so instead of going out, I invited them to come over to our house for lunch or dinner. Our family house in the Philippines has always been known as the haunted house in the neighborhood, but since I didn't really believe in that stuff anymore, I never gave it much thought. I'd spend hours alone in the house and never felt anything weird. One of my closest friends, who had recently given birth, agreed to visit, and since I'm her baby's godmother, I asked her to bring her baby along too. I told my grandma that my friend was coming over, and she offered to go to the market to buy something special to cook for us. I decided to stay home so my friend wouldn't have to wait outside with her baby, especially since it was just my grandma and me at the house. My siblings had other plans. My friend arrived about 10 minutes after my grandma left, and her baby was asleep in her arms. I told her she could put him in one of the rooms so he wouldn't be disturbed while we caught up. Once the baby was settled, we went back to the living room to chat. As soon as she sat down, though, she stood right back up, her eyes locked on the kitchen. Our house isn't that big. When you're in the living room, you can see straight into the kitchen and dining area. She said, "I'm going to go say hi to your grandma and introduce myself." I told her, "Sure, once she gets back from the market." She looked at me, confused, and asked, "Isn't that your grandma in the kitchen right now?" Every hair on my body stood on end. I laughed nervously, thinking she was messing with me. "That's impossible," I said. "She just left to buy food." My friend's expression changed, and she asked, "Then who's the woman with short hair wearing a white duster, house dress, standing in your kitchen?" My grandma has short hair, but she hasn't seen my friend for a very long time. I felt a chill run down my spine. I shook my head and told her, "My grandma is wearing a blue duster today, and I've been here alone." We both cautiously went to check the kitchen, but no one was there. Just as we were trying to make sense of what she saw, we heard her baby crying from the room where we had left him. He had finally woken up. We decided not to dwell on it, brushed it off, and focused on the baby instead. But honestly, that moment has stayed with me ever since. There was some drama at my last hostel, so I just wanted to hear some people's hostel drama stories. I can start. A few of us were hanging out in the common room, and then this young couple came in. Let's call them Romeo and Juliet. After some intros, someone asked the couple how long they'd been dating, and Romeo mentioned that they met 2 weeks ago at another hostel. Juliet went for a smoke, and me and a few of the slightly older people were just teasing Romeo a bit about his puppy love and telling him how he should have fun, but not expect anything too serious in the long term. He kept telling us how much he liked her and wanted to make things work, and we all thought it was super cute. Romeo leaves the common room half an hour later, and an hour after he leaves, one of Juliet's friends comes into the common room and starts complaining very loudly about Romeo. Meanwhile, Juliet is in the doorway visibly crying. Her friend told us that Romeo called Juliet fat and a bunch of other mean things. We all looked at each other very uncomfortably because we obviously misread the whole relationship dynamic. At 4 a.m., Juliet starts screaming and arguing in her sleep. I only know this because I met one of her roommates. The roommate said that Juliet was yelling about how someone didn't understand her and that he should be better. The roommate tried to contact reception, but the person working at the desk couldn't leave since they were the only one there for a while. So, the room was subjugated to Juliet's screams all night. The next morning during breakfast, Romeo is sitting and eating by himself and looking sad. Me and the rest of the people not involved kinda just leave him be. Juliet's friend then comes in, makes eye contact with Romeo, and then very aggressively sights on the opposite side of the room. The vibe was really weird. I didn't see Juliet again for the rest of my stay, but a lot of the women I talked to told me that Romeo kept making comments about their weight by insinuating that their pastries were full of sugar. I tried to avoid Romeo for the rest of my stay. Probably not the juiciest drama story, but it was definitely memorable LOL. Back during WoW's second expansion, there was this guy in my guild I'd become friends with mostly through other friends. We talked more and more over time and became fairly close. He had this asshole roommate, and I could hear the guy sometimes, especially when something went wrong during a raid. He'd scream and throw fits. He was pretty awful sounding. My friend told me he wasn't just loud and obnoxious, but verbally and sometimes physically abusive too. I had my own apartment, so I said, you know what? Come stay with me. Just long enough to get you on your feet and into a place that's safe. He showed up at my place with a trash bag full of his stuff and a laptop. I set him up in the apartment and started trying to help him find a job. Well, he did not want a job. He did not get a job either. He sat in my apartment day after day, eating my food and slowly draining my savings. No matter how hard I tried to get him motivated, he would just dig in his heels and somehow become more sedentary. Eventually, I told him he had to go. I couldn't afford to keep him there. He was just couch surfing. I spoke to some people and eventually pieced together that his method of securing a new temporary place was playing on the sympathies of his friends to convince them he was in a terrible living situation. It just worked really well on me because he had that loud, obnoxious roommate to play off of. He wound up calling a nearby relative to come and get him, I think his aunt. I don't know what he told her I supposedly did, but I have never seen a more venomous look from someone in my life. As far as I know, he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after that, but frankly, I don't care where he ended up. He also stole a bunch of my stuff. First and last time I do anything like that. Guy I knew in college met a girl online and spent every day talking about her. She lived about 6 hours away, so he planned to take a semester off and pursue this relationship. He got a job in her town and asked if I'd help him move out there since my car would hold more than he could take on a bus. I had a long weekend off and figured why not? A road trip cold be fun. I'd drive him out as a goodbye present, and the way back I planned to visit Yellowstone. Well, we arrive and it turns out he doesn't have an apartment lined up and he found a job posting in his girlfriend's town. He hadn't actually gotten the job, or even applied yet. I make a bunch of phone calls and find him a room to rent that will let him move in that day with just first, last, and deposit, even without a job. I'm tired and disgusted with his lack of planning, but figure it's worth staying the night and trying to end things on good terms with my buddy. Then he breaks down and confesses that he hasn't actually met this girl. The nights he spent video chatting with her were really just him watching her vlog and jacking it. They've never talked. never texted, never even emailed. Hell, he's never even left so much as a comment or like on one of her videos. She genuinely didn't, still doesn't, know he existed. His plan was to hang out at this game shop she talks a lot about until she showed up and somehow create a relationship from that. He thought that they'd meet and she'd fall in love with him and move back to our college town to marry him, all before the next semester began. That didn't happen. Instead, I made my buddy buy a bus ticket for his ride back to school and left. He came back to school and got more cringy, not less. I lost track of him after that. He and I were part of the same forum many, many years ago. He was dealing with his issues and I was dealing with mine. I think we both went there to escape, where people wouldn't judge. Also, because we were bored. I'm not quite sure when we got properly talking. I think it's when he told a terrible joke about kipper ties. We used to share everything with each other, over MSN. I'd give him advice about his love life, and he'd listen to all my fuck-ups. It took quite a few fuck-ups before we eventually met up. I think I already knew we were in love, but seeing him in person really cemented it. We decided to give it a go, even though we lived 300 miles away from each other. We had a lot of ups and downs. I was distant. He lived with his ex-girlfriend for a bit, even though she didn't have a job and couldn't afford her half of the rent. The same ex-GF who I'd given him advice on, who he had nicknamed Trouble and liked to claim she was pregnant every so often. We got over that, along with many other things, and finally moved in with each other. I thought our issues were going to be solved when there was no distance between us. Ends up, we were just very different people who wanted very different things, and the distance wasn't going to change that. We broke up after 3.5 years together. None of that's the horror story. Not the way he treated me, not the fact he probably cheated on me, not that I wasn't a priority and used to cry myself to sleep. About 1.5 years after breaking up, he gets back in touch and we talk like it was in the beginning when we were friends. After a few weeks, he asked if I want to get back together. I said no. I told him that he'd broken my heart again. The next day, I got a phone call from his work because I was still his emergency contact asking me if I knew where he was because he hasn't turned up. The police got in touch too. The last phone call that day was from his mom to let me know that he'd killed himself. After college ended, I was playing a game called EVE Online. I was in a corporation with a dude who I thought was the coolest. He had sold shit in game for real-world money and had built a supercomputer. He had a smoking hot girlfriend and had pictures of them rock climbing doing some super cool shit. He was also like a head chef where he worked, and since I was a chef as well, I had a little bit of a bromo crush on him. He told me after I graduated that he could hook me up with a manager job, and all I had to do was move up there. I sold everything I owned that day at a pawn shop and bought a U-Haul and started driving. 1 hour before I got there, it was like a week-long drive. He called me and told me the job was no longer available, and I shouldn't come. When he found out how close I was, he said to just come anyways. When I got there, I was completely blown away. They lived in a disgusting Section 8 apartment with 4 other people, in a 1-bedroom apartment. They had like 3 cats, which I'm allergic to, and a kid as well. Day 1, it was all drugs and partying. I did not partake. I was not enthused. Day 2, I went into the city looking for a shit job to survive. I got one. It was shit. Day 3, my buddy tells me we're all moving out and into a nice apartment. Week 3, we actually move into a new apartment, and the first night in that apartment, he starts beating his smoking hot girl in front of their kid. The second time he beat her, I called the cops. Him and his girl immediately said I was the bad guy and that they were just loving each other. They had the cops escort me from the apartment. So there I was, 1,700 miles away from home, homeless at 2 a.m., and it's fucking raining on all my shit. Lars, you are a sack of shit, and I hope you die of space herpes. I've been active in numerous online communities over the years, and have been fortunate enough to hang out with many of the friends I've made there in person. There's only been one incident I couldn't cope with. He picked me up at the airport, which was very nice of him, and as soon as we got into the car, he started picking his nose. There's a lot that goes through your mind when you hop into a vehicle with someone you've never been alone with, and you immediately catch them 2 knuckles deep in their rostrum. I looked quickly away so that he wouldn't know I caught him and be embarrassed if he was just trying to sneak one out before I noticed. If he did notice, he didn't seem embarrassed, so I relaxed a little. I guessed maybe he was just so confident about himself and our friendship that he descended past caring if I saw him take care of a quick boog. Fine, sure. When I finally looked back at him, he was wiping his fingers across his dashboard. To this day, I'm not really sure what to think, but this guy spent the entirety of the few hours we were together scooping out boogers and wiping them off on parts of his car, or the table, or wherever it was that we'd stopped at. I realized I was being transported in a rolling booger shrine, and that there was nothing I could touch without needing to wash my hands. I was sitting on a crust of fossilized booger stuff. I had to be. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, he was a nice dude, but I wound up ollieing out of our visit early because I couldn't handle it. I don't consider myself a clean freak, but as wiping started to stack, it was all I could do not to throw open the passenger door and roll myself out into traffic to escape. I still wonder if I should have done or said anything to save him some grief in the future, but it didn't feel like it was my place, you know? What do you even say?